Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Dark topic today, be warned. Let's do it. Who's the scariest person you've ever heard of? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Richard Chase is the one who always stuck with me. He was schizophrenic and thought he didn't have enough blood, so became obsessed with consuming gore. He stole and butchered animals and later murdered people to harvest their organs. What always creeped me out was that he would go door to door, and if the door was locked, he would just leave. But if the door was unlocked, he considered it an open invitation to come in. They called him the Vampire of Sacramento. Joseph Mengele, the experiments he did on children, particularly twins, is horrific. The letter. My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and two others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak chops or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you want cut from. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body and is sold as veal cutlets, brings the highest price. John stayed there so long that he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole two boys, one 7, one 11. He took them to his home, stripped them naked, and tied them up in a closet, and then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy, because he had the fattest ass and, of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried, and stewed. The little boy was next, and he went the same way. At that time I was living at 409 East 100th Street. He told me so often how good human flesh was, and I made up my mind to taste it. On June 3, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street and brought you a pot, cheese, and strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her, and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take the meat to my room, cook, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was, roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not eat her, though I could have if I wished. She died of oh, this is gross. The Toolbox Killers, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, those guys. I had to take a long break from true crime after reading about that case. There was an audio recording that was so disturbing that people in the courtroom literally got sick. The audio recording is not publicly available, but a transcript of it is, and reading it, me up. Joseph Ricci, the person that created Elan School. I implore you of looking it up if you don't know what its topic is. It was basically a school that tortured children both mentally and physically, humiliating them, and also feeding parents lies consisting of ideas that their children were healing. Joseph Ricci almost even became governor of the state of Maine. This guy had abused children even beyond his death until 2011, the year Elan School closed. My heart goes to the young people that almost committed suicide afterwards and their families. May this mother rot in hell for eternity. In general, Albert Fish. Personally, a few years ago, a video from my area of 3 teenagers beating a beaver to death with rocks and logs went around. Kids ended up at least suspended for the rest of the year and charged with animal abuse. I'm a police officer, This isn't the scariest person I heard of, but he's among the most unsettling people I've dealt with. We had a really scrawny kid, just barely 18, that killed 3 people during separate robberies. The people he killed didn't fight back, and he had no personal grudge against them. He murdered them because he figured it lowered the odds of him getting caught. On the occasions I was in the same room as the kid, I got the distinct impression that, given the chance, he'd kill me without a second thought. It was like sitting across from a crocodile. Anyway, the kid ended up at the county while awaiting trial for his various murders. The story we got after was that the kid was trying to bully other inmates by talking up his body count. Another guy, who had been friends with a woman the kid was bragging about having killed, beat the shit out of the kid in front of the whole pod. He then jammed a couple of fingers up the kid's ass and, in front of the whole pod, made the kid lick them off his fingers. Gross. Miguel Ricard. His name might not mean much in the English-speaking world, but he's one of the most depraved criminals in Spanish history. He tortured and murdered 3 teenage girls in 1992 and got out of prison after serving just 21 years in prison. His accomplice disappeared and is most likely dead. The most terrifying thing about him is that he's still out there and could theoretically kill again. He's involved with drug crime as of 2020. His pathetic sentence was a source of great embarrassment for Spain on the international stage. Colin Pitchfork. He and killed 2 teenage girls, one with his young son in the car. He was sentenced for a minimum of 30 years, but later got it reduced to 28 for good behavior. He was released in 2021 and recalled about 2 months last after talking to a lone woman in a car park, claiming to be a little litter picker. He was once again set by the board to be released in July of last year, but the panel thankfully decided that he is too much of a risk to be released. Andrei Chikatilo. During the time of the Soviet Union, there was a man born in what is Ukraine, and some horrendous things happened there. He got a job as a teacher. He took sexual gratification from harming or killing others. He got away for so long because other teachers didn't alert the authorities because they were afraid of getting punished. He was eventually fired for obvious reasons. He later got a job that involved him moving across the USSR, which made it damn near impossible to catch him. The USSR had to eventually admit there was a serial killer about. They almost did catch him once, but the blood at the crime scene, since they didn't get a match. They did eventually catch him via basically smoking him out of train stops. By the time he was caught, he had killed 53 people and was convicted for 52 of said murders. He was an absolutely horrible person. This is all coming out of memory, so I apologize for anything that isn't 100% accurate. Gilda Ray, or something like that, medieval-era nobleman who killed and arred so many children, necrophilia type stuff, created a church to funnel children to him. His kill count is in the hundreds. The kicker is that asshole literally rode into battle with the Joan of Arc. Crazy shit. I mean, while we're on the subject of dark thoughts and dark stories, do you ever think about, maybe I shouldn't even say this, do you ever think about, like, in the medieval times or before modern forensics or fingerprinting, how many murders went unsolved? Or, people got caught, but I wonder how many got away with it. Dozens, hundreds. Crazy. Boring one, but Hitler. Even as he knew he was losing, he sped up the final solution. He knew he'd lost, so he had as many people killed as possible despite it serving no purpose for the good of the country or wider war effort. Oscar Dirlewanger was basically a terrorist the SS sent in to do effed up shit when it was too immoral for them to do it themselves. He ran a penal battalion and would allow them to run amok in Eastern European cities, arring, murdering, razing hospitals with wounded Germans, and hanging civilians for shits and giggles. He even would kill his own guys when he was bored. He probably died of natural causes in French imprisonment, likely caused by the collection of Polish guards, Polish POWs, and other former forced laborers he was with. There are, however, some rumors he got recruited into the French Foreign Legion. Peter Scully, creator of the infamous Daisy video. Do not Google. I did not include the full name just in case searching might bring up photographic results. The point is, he recorded himself brutally arring an infant girl, giving her a lifetime of injuries. The video was thought to never have been uploaded, but Josh Duggar had it on his computer. It was later tweeted out on Twitter. Elon personally unbanned the user who posted it. Fair warning, if you look up Scully, he has the creepiest Joker smile ever. Edmund Kemper, American serial killer who murdered 10 people including a 15-year-old girl, his own mother, and her best friend from May 1972 to April 1973. Years earlier, at the age of 15, Kemper had murdered his paternal grandparents, plus he's 6'9", a literal monster. Plus, I was around that area at the time, so scares me. Ted Bundy was there at the same time too. Israel Keys. I used to listen to true crime podcasts a lot. I listened to a podcast on him and it described the way he killed this older couple in their home. I haven't listened to any true crime since. That was over 2 years ago. Even though he was dead before I even heard of him, I will sometimes still have difficulty sleeping because I randomly remember things from that podcast. I wish I had never heard of him, and sorry to all of you who are reading this comment. The scary thing about him was that he was so under the radar. And the only reason he was caught when he was is because he, for some reason, started using Samantha Koning's debit card at the ATM footage caught the car he was driving. There must be others who have learned from him and will never be caught because people like him were caught. Carl Panzram is top 10. Serial artist and murdered with hundreds, if not thousands of victims. He was active from 1910 to 1930-ish. He lived as a classic American hobo, hopping trains, traveling from place to place, R-ing and killing as many men and boys as he could get his hands on. He even had a brief stint working in Africa, forget which country, as an overseer of a plantation. You can imagine how that went. He also burglarized President Taft's home, had some great quotes, most notably, "I wish the world all had one throat, and that I had my hands around it. I'm sorry for only two things. They are that I harmed a few animals, and that I am unable to murder the entire human race. Naturally, I love Jesus very much now. I love him so much I would crucify him all over again. And my personal favorite, as he was getting ready to be executed, hurry up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around with that rope. Just an all-around rotten dude." Vlad the Impaler also belongs on that list. He had innocent men, women, and children impaled on giant spikes from anus to mouth. For entertainment at his banquets, he did this to his enemies too, and at times forced family members to watch. He deterred away an invading Ottoman army by placing a sea of tens of thousands of impaled people around his lands. Legend has it that the Ottoman forces saw this horrific sight and turned the other way to ride back. I can tell a bit about Serhii Tkach, who killed 37 girls, mostly aged 8 to 18, on the territory of Ukraine. In the late 80s, early 90s, parents couldn't leave their daughters alone and told them not to go out in the evening because of the psycho. He was working at the police, so he was aware of all the steps and was chased after for more than 20 years. To sum up, I should say I'm glad he's already dead, died in prison in Zhytomyr in 2018. Jimmy Savile is somehow not on here yet. He didn't invent pedophilia, but the sheer scale and confidence he went about his horrible life is staggering. I couldn't sleep well for a few days, an age going on an ill-advised deep dive of his story. Watching archival footage of a man swaggering out of the mental health hospital where he just S.A.'d a minor, cigar hanging from his lips, it broke me a little. Richard Kuklinski, one of the most prolific serial killers of all time, with something like 300 murders. There was a documentary with interviews of him, and that guy was just so stone cold. He's not often mentioned with the other famous ones, I guess, since he took up a career as a mafia hitman, after having killed over 100 people, if I recall correctly, almost as a sport. The main reason he gave was that they pissed him off. This dude is straight up nightmare fuel. He'd lynch a guy with his own belt behind a bar and then go inside to finish his drink. A giant of a man, then just completely dead inside.